Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be talking about something that's been making a lot of noise in the real estate world.
Oh, yeah.
The BC home flipping tax.
Yeah.
It's coming into effect next year. And I know a lot of you are real estate enthusiasts, so we're going to dig into it today.
Absolutely.
We've got a whole stack of sources to help us.
Okay.
We've got the official BC home flipping tax and exemptions from BC home flipping tax documents straight from the government, as well as the detailed Bill 15 itself.
Right.
And to see what the real-world reactions are, we've got a CTV News article titled, BC Prepares for Home Flipping Tax Amid Criticism.
It's definitely been a hot topic, that's for sure.
It has.
And I think it's important for everyone listening to remember that what we're really trying to do here today is understand what this tax is really all about.
Yeah.
Not just the mechanics of it, but the effects that it's going for and the potential unintended consequences.
Absolutely, because it's one thing to read a headline about a new tax.
Right.
But it's another to understand how that might impact the market
Right.
and everyone's decisions as an investor.
For sure.
So let's take a step back first and think about the big picture.
Okay.
What's the problem that this tax is really trying to solve?
Well, I mean, it's no secret that the BC government's been very vocal about the current affordability crisis in the province. Housing prices, they've just skyrocketed.
Yeah, I have.
And it's getting tougher and tougher for people to enter the market, let alone find a place that they can actually afford.
Okay, so it sounds like this flipping tax is part of a bigger strategy to address that.
Absolutely. It's a key component of what they're calling the Homes for People plan.
Okay.
And as you might expect,
Yeah.
the name kind of says it all.
Yeah.
They're trying to make housing more accessible for people who want to live there. Right.
Not just treat it as an investment,
Right.
quick profit opportunity.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this all fits together.
Yeah.
But how exactly is this tax
Okay.
supposed to make housing more affordable?
So the idea is to discourage
Okay.
what they're calling short-term holding for profit, essentially flipping, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So they're going to put a tax
Yeah.
on profits
Right.
from properties that are sold within a certain time frame. And they hope that's going to cool down the speculative activity,
Right.
which they think is driving up prices.
Okay, so if fewer people are flipping, in theory, that should help to stabilize the market
In theory, yeah.
and make it more affordable for,
Yeah.
the actual residents.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
At least that's the theory.
Yeah, that's the theory.
But I think like with any major policy change, there's always going to be different opinions on whether or not
Yeah, for sure.
it will achieve what it says it will.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get down to the
Nitty-gritty
Sure.
of this tax. The BC home flipping tax document seems like a good place to start.
Okay.
What's the basic definition we're working with here?
Yeah, so the document basically says it's a 20% tax on profits from properties sold within 365 days.
Okay.
So within a year.
Right.
And then that rate gradually decreases
Okay.
until you get to 730 days. So 2 years of ownership. And after that, you're basically in the clear.
Okay, so wait.
Yeah.
Even if I own a property for, say, 18 months,
Yep.
I could still be hit with this tax.
Potentially. Yeah.
Wow.
And the thing to remember is
Okay.
it applies even if you bought the property before the law
Right.
comes into effect on January 1, 2025.
Okay.
So if you've been holding on to a property
Right.
for a while now as an investment, this is definitely something you need to keep in mind.
Wow, that's a pretty wide net they're casting.
It is.
I can already see this creating some headaches for people who aren't necessarily trying to flip, in the traditional sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
What about the folks who are just upgrading their homes?
Right.
Or maybe they're facing life changes
Yeah.
that are forcing them to sell sooner than anticipated.
For sure, life happens.
Right, exactly.
And it's not always about,
Right.
making a quick buck.
Yeah.
And this is where the exemptions from BC home flipping tax document really comes in.
Okay.
It outlines a whole bunch of
Let's start.
situations where the tax wouldn't apply.
Okay, let's dive into that.
Okay.
Because I think it's just as important to know
Yeah,
who isn't affected as it is to know who is.
absolutely.
So who are we talking about here?
Well, for starters, there's some obvious ones.
Okay.
Charities, governments, indigenous nations.
Right.
They're usually not engaged in speculative flipping activities.
Right.
So they're exempt.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
What about some of those more everyday situations? Sure. Where someone might need to sell quickly, But not because they're trying to game the system.
Right. Yeah, the document covers those too.
Okay.
So you're exempt if you inherit a property.
Okay.
If you have to sell because of, say, a job relocation,
Right.
or maybe a divorce,
Okay.
or even a natural disaster makes your home uninhabitable.
Right.
So basically, these are situations where
Right.
it wouldn't be fair to slap someone with this tax.
Right, because those are legitimate life circumstances.
Exactly.
Not a shady real estate scheme.
Exactly.
So it sounds like they're trying to be, reasonably fair here.
Yeah.
But I bet there's a lot of fine print involved.
Oh, there's definitely fine print.
Right.
A lot of it.
Okay.
But before we get into all of that,
Yeah.
I think we need to take a step back and look at this bigger Homes for People plan.
Okay.
Because this flipping tax is really just one piece of the puzzle, right?
Yeah, you're right. We keep mentioning is Homes for People plan. Yeah. I'm still not 100% sure what it actually is.
Sure.
What else is in this plan besides the flipping tax?
Well, in the CTV News article,
Yeah.
Minister Kalan, he's the Minister of Housing.
Right.
He outlines a bunch of other initiatives.
Okay.
He talks about zoning changes.
Okay.
To encourage the building of different types of housing, like townhouses and duplexes, which are often more affordable than a single-family home. Yeah. So the idea is to kind of increase the supply of those options.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So it's not just about penalizing flippers.
Exactly.
But it's also about creating more housing options in general.
Absolutely. And he also mentions using government land for development, which could be a really powerful tool if it's done right.
Right, because if they're the ones building it, then they have more control over
for sure
affordability.
Absolutely. There's also a few programs
designed to help first-time home buyers.
Okay.
So that might be things like down payment assistance or tax breaks to help people get into the market.
Okay, so it sounds like a pretty multi-pronged approach.
It does.
You've got the demand side with the flip-in tax and the supply side with all these other initiatives.
Right.
Okay, I'm starting to get a better sense of the big picture here. I'm still curious to see how this tax is going to actually play out in practice.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
And that's where it can get a little tricky.
Right.
Calculating this tax isn't always straightforward.
Okay.
There's a lot of nuances to think about.
Yeah.
But I think that's a perfect topic for part 2.
For part 2
of our deep dive.
Stay tuned.
We'll get into all those calculations and different scenarios.
Sounds good.
Next time.
All right. We'll see you next time. Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty here.
I'm ready to dive into the details.
Sure.
Of how this tax is actually calculated.
Okay.
Because we've heard it's not as simple as just
not
slapping a 20% tax on any profit you make from selling a property.
You're right. There's a sliding scale based on how long you've owned the property. And Bill 15 really lays out a whole bunch of factors that can affect that final amount you owe.
Okay.
So it definitely can get complicated.
Yeah.
And this is where, having a good accountant or tax advisor can be really invaluable.
Right.
But to give you a general idea, let's walk through an example.
Perfect. I love hypothetical scenarios.
Okay. So let's say you decide to try your hand at flipping a condo in Victoria.
Okay. I'm game.
All right. So you buy it for $600,000.
Okay.
And you manage to sell it a year and a half later for $750,000.
Okay.
So on the surface, it looks like you've made a cool $150,000 profit.
Yeah. Time to celebrate, right?
Not so fast. Remember, we're in the world of the BC home flipping tax.
Right.
So because you owned it for more than a year, but less than 2, you're not going to be hit with that full 20%.
Okay.
Instead, you're going to have a lower rate.
Right.
Based on that sliding scale we talked about.
Okay, so less than 20%.
Yeah.
But still something. But you mentioned that it's not just as simple as the difference between my buying and selling price.
Exactly. So Bill 15 refers to the initial purchase price and all those extra costs associated with buying the condo as your cost of acquisition.
Okay.
So that would be things like legal fees, property transfer tax, appraisal costs, home inspection, probably paid for.
Right, because those are all real expenses that I incurred to acquire the property.
Absolutely.
So let's just say, for the sake of argument, those extra costs were $15,000.
Okay, so that sounds about right.
Okay.
So now your cost of acquisition is actually $615,000.
Okay.
Not the $600,000.
Right.
Which means your potential profit is only $135,000.
Oh, okay.
Starting to make a dent
Yeah.
in your imaginary profits.
Okay.
But we're not done yet.
Oh, there's more.
Yes.
Okay.
The next thing you need to think about is
okay.
any improvements that you made to the property.
Right.
And this is where Bill 15 gets super detailed. I know you love those renovation shows.
I do, yeah.
Maybe they'll come in handy here.
Right.
So how do they define improvements?
Mm-hmm.
The key phrase here is of an enduring nature.
Okay.
So basically, anything that adds lasting value
right.
to the property.
So it's not just, like changing a light bulb.
No.
Okay,
So yeah, major renovations, but it can also be things like upgrading your appliances, replacing flooring, landscaping, all that good stuff.
Okay, so let's say I put in some new hardwood floors. Gave the kitchen a facelift with some trendy backsplash and countertops.
Right.
Maybe threw in a new stainless steel fridge.
Okay, very nice.
So let's call that a $25,000
investment.
So we can subtract that $25,000 from your potential profit.
All right.
And now we're down to $110,000.
Wow.
So remember, it's this final amount
that
the tax is calculated on.
Okay.
Not your initial $150,000.
Oh, wow. That's way more complex than I thought at first.
Yeah.
And I imagine Bill 15 goes into all sorts of different scenarios and exceptions.
That sort.
Like, what if I inherited the condo? Or it was damaged in a fire?
There's a ton of situations the legislation covers.
Right.
And this is why it's really important to get professional advice.
Right.
If you're dealing with something that's not a super straightforward sale.
Okay.
The rules can get really nuanced.
Yeah. And you want to have someone in your corner.
Right.
Who knows what they're doing.
Okay, so let's say I've crunched all the numbers.
Okay.
And I'm looking at my final taxable profit. How do I actually figure out how much I owe?
Right. So remember, because you owned it for more than 365 days.
Right.
But less than 730.
Okay.
You're going to have to look at that sliding scale.
Right.
That's in the BC home fighting tax document.
Okay.
The closer you get to that 2-year mark,
the
lower that rate's going to be.
Right. So there's an incentive to hold on to it longer.
There is.
Okay.
Even if you are ultimately planning to sell.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But before we get too lost in the weeds of calculations here, I want to go back to something we talked about earlier, which is the potential impact of this tax on the market as a whole.
Yeah.
Because that's ultimately what matters to investors.
Understanding those market dynamics is key.
And as you might expect, there are differing opinions on how this is all going to play out.
Absolutely.
The CTV News article really highlights that debate.
It does.
Mr. Callan seems pretty confident.
He does.
That this tax is going to help cool things down, make housing more affordable.
He's framing it as a key part of their strategy.
Right.
But then you've got people like Ryan Dash, the realtor, who's quoted in the article.
Yeah.
He's expressing some serious concerns.
Yeah, he's worried that it might actually backfire and make things even tougher.
Right.
For regular homeowners.
Exactly.
His argument is that people might be hesitant to sell if they're going to face this big tax bill.
Right.
And if fewer homes are on the market, wouldn't that drive prices up?
That's his concern.
Right. It's a valid concern.
It is. And it raises the question of who is this actually targeting?
Right.
Is it targeting the big-time flippers that they're talking about? Or is it actually going to hit everyday people?
Who are just trying to navigate the market.
Exactly.
Right. Because if it discourages regular people from selling, it might actually have the opposite effect of what the government intends.
Exactly. And then you've got the BCREA, the BC Real Estate Association.
Yeah.
They're weighing in with their perspective.
Okay.
They're not really big fans of this tax-based approach.
Right.
They're advocating for more incentives to encourage new construction.
So the idea is that if you increase the supply of housing, that will naturally bring prices down.
That's their thinking,
It's interesting how this one policy has sparked so many different opinions.
Yeah, sure.
It really highlights how complex the housing market is and the challenges of trying to control it.
You know, it kind of reminds me of what happened in Vancouver back in the 2010s with the foreign buyers tax.
Right.
It did cool things down for a bit.
Yeah.
But some argue that it just pushed investors to other markets.
Right.
So could we see a similar pattern?
Yeah, that's a good question.
With this flipping tax.
It's like a game of whack-a-mole.
Exactly.
If people you're determined to flip, they'll find a way.
They'll find a way, yeah.
Whether it's moving to a different province.
Or finding loopholes.
Or finding loopholes.
Within the system.
Right.
Yeah, it's tough to predict.
It's a puzzle with constantly changing pieces.
Exactly. Human behavior is tough to predict.
Right. Especially in a market as dynamic as real estate.
Absolutely.
I think we put together a pretty good picture.
We have.
So far.
Yeah.
We've got the mechanics, the exemptions, the potential impacts.
Right.
But there's one more piece I want to examine. Before we wrap things up.
I think I know where you're going with this.
Okay.
We've talked about the what and the how.
Yeah.
But we haven't really explored the why from an investor's perspective.
Right.
So how is this going to change things for you?
And that's what we'll tackle in the final part.
That's right.
Of our deep dive.
Ooh.
Okay, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into this BC home flipping tax. We've covered so much already.
We have.
But I want to bring it all home now.
Okay.
How does this tax actually change the game for an investor like me?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. And it really comes down to your own goals.
Okay.
And how much risk you're willing to take on.
Right.
This tax definitely adds a whole other layer of complexity to the equation.
It does.
So you need a really clear strategy.
Okay, so strategy is key. But where do I even begin?
Well, I think you start with the fundamentals. What are you hoping to get out of your investments?
Right.
Are you looking for long-term appreciation?
Okay.
Maybe a steady cash flow from rentals? Or are you more interested in those quick flips that we've been talking about?
Well, to be honest with you, I've always liked the idea of the quick flips.
Sure, like those HGTV style.
Yeah, exactly.
Buy a fixer-upper.
Put in some sweat equity.
Yeah.
Make a profit.
Right, but now with this tax, it makes you wonder.
It does.
If that's still a good strategy.
Yeah, it's definitely something I need to think about.
So if flipping is still your goal, you really have to factor in that holding period.
Right.
And run the numbers carefully.
Right, all those calculations.
Yeah, exactly. Those are crucial.
Yeah.
Especially with a shorter time frame.
Because that profit margin can shrink really quickly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Especially if you're not holding on to it for that long. And it makes those renovation costs and those holding expenses even more important. And don't forget about those exemptions.
Right.
If you have to sell within 2 years.
Yeah.
Because of something unexpected,
right,
like a job relocation, family emergency, you might not even have to pay the tax.
Okay, so flipping is not completely off the table.
No.
But it definitely...
But it takes a lot more planning now.
Requires more planning.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
What about some other strategies?
Okay.
How does this affect, say, long-term appreciation or rental income, if that's your goal?
Yeah.
The flipping tax might not be that big of a deal.
Okay.
Because as long as you're holding on to the property for more than 2 years, you're not going to have to pay it.
So for those buy and hold investors, the strategy doesn't really change that much?
Not really, no.
Okay.
But it's still worth paying attention to how it affects the market overall. Some experts are predicting that this could lead to slower sales. Because people will be hesitant to sell.
Within that 2-year window.
Right.
And if there are fewer properties on the market, wouldn't that push prices up even more?
It's definitely a possibility.
So it's kind of a...
It is, yeah.
Catch-22.
It's something to keep an eye on.
Right.
Because this tax is just one piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
And the housing market is complex.
Yeah.
There are so many other factors. Interest rates, the economy, population growth. It's impossible to...
Isolate it.
Yeah, isolate this one change.
So it sounds like the key is to be adaptable and stay informed.
Absolutely, because no matter what strategy you choose, you need to be prepared to adjust as the market changes.
And this is really where having a good team of advisors can be so helpful.
You need a realtor who knows the market.
Yeah.
A mortgage broker.
To get you the best financing.
Exactly.
And a tax professional.
Yes, to guide you through all
the ins and outs of this tax.
The ins and outs, absolutely.
Because this is not a DIY kind of situation.
Especially with a tax this nuanced.
Yeah.
Getting expert advice can save you a lot of headaches down the road.
Okay, before we wrap up, I want to go back to that StatsCan data that we talked about.
Okay.
It showed that only a tiny percentage
It
of sale or flips.
like 2.8%, something like that.
Yeah, which is pretty surprising considering how much attention this has gotten.
It really makes you wonder who they're actually trying to target here.
Right.
And what the effects are going to be for the market.
Right, because even if I'm not flipping myself, the ripple effects could still impact me.
A housing market's kind of like an ecosystem. Everything's connected.
It is, yeah.
So even small changes can have big effects.
Well, I definitely feel a lot more prepared to navigate this whole new landscape now.
I'm glad to hear that.
Thanks for taking the time to break this all down.
Oh, you're welcome.
It's been really insightful.
Well, remember, knowledge is power.
Yes, it is.
Especially in real estate. So stay informed, stay curious, and you'll be in a good spot to make good decisions.
No matter what.
No matter what.
Comes my way.
That's right.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
It was my pleasure.
And until next time, happy investing, everyone.